Thank you all for joining us today and welcome to our first State of Retail Startup Investment webinar powered by RILA's Retail Innovation Center. My name is Katie Nicholas, Senior Manager of Innovation, leading RILA's Retail Innovation Center alongside Nicholas Ahrens. And with us are today's panelists, Scott Friend from Bain Capital Ventures, Santosh Sankar of Dynamo Ventures, and Will Decker from Plug and Play Technology Center. Before we get started, let me go over a few quick reminders. All attendees are in listen-only mode. To ask a question, please submit using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to incorporate those into the conversation. Following today's session, the webinar recording will be shared with all of you. For today's webinar, I'll give you a brief intro into RILA's Retail Innovation Center, give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves, and jump into conversations including the impact of COVID pandemic on venture capital, retail trends, and the startup landscape, as well as some other topics. I want to first remind everyone about the importance of antitrust compliance. Our goal is to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, so please avoid any discussion of prices, pricing policies, terms, or conditions of doing business, or of course, any sort of market allocation. Also to be avoided is any discussion that might be perceived as suggesting that anyone should cease doing business with a particular supplier or customer, or any other discussion that might be viewed as coercive or exclusionary toward another company. If anyone feels uncomfortable about any subject of discussion or has any questions, please speak up and we will stop the conversation until we can provide legal guidance. RILA's Retail Innovation Center equips leading retailers to navigate transformation through innovation and reorient the innovation ecosystem toward retail needs. The RIC connects innovative technologies, startups, and retail companies by leveraging its RTech networks that help us keep a pulse on this ecosystem, recognizing the groundbreaking work propelling our industry forward. Each network represents critical stakeholders in the retail innovation ecosystem. Those communities are the investor network and startup network. By leveraging these two networks, along with our existing relationships with leading established technology providers, we attempt to provide all RILA executive communities with both the content and connections to navigate transformation, whether in the marketplace or as brought on by a crisis like COVID-19. Now for the main event, I'll turn it over to each of our speakers to give a brief intro about themselves and their organization before we get into today's discussion. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Scott first. And can each of you also tell us where you're zooming in from today? Because I know we're all in different locations.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. And hi, everybody. Scott Friend here, zooming in from just outside of Boston, where it is 55 and sunny miraculously today. So kind of nice. Appreciate everyone's time. I'm a partner at Bain Capital Ventures. We're the venture capital arm of Bain Capital. We invest across the technology ecosystem and really across stages. But my focus over the last 14 years while I've been at Bain Capital has really been on commerce, almost exclusively. I, prior to joining Bain Capital, started a company in the commerce tech ecosystem called Profit Logic. We were focused on big data and analytics to help major retailers figure out when to take markdowns. And we sold that company to Oracle in 2005. And I spent a year in Oracle's retail industry group and then joined Bain, who was my biggest investor. I have invested across the retail and commerce technology landscape over the last 14 years, predominantly B2B companies that help retailers and brands operate more effectively, gain efficiency, optimize their business, both online and offline, and a handful of direct-to-consumer businesses like Rent the Runway and Jet.com that we think have interesting new disruptive retail models. So that's a little bit about me, and I look forward to the discussion with all of you and my colleagues here today.
Great. Santosh, you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks for having us and hosting us once again. I'm Santosh. I'm a partner here at Dynamo Ventures, and I'm calling in from the scenic city, Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I guess we must have kind of swapped weather systems here because it's about 30 degrees and was flurrying earlier. So we're definitely in the heart of winter. But here at Dynamo, my partners and I focus specifically around supply chain opportunities across the world. So about a third of our capital is deployed abroad. And with that, 2020 has been a very interesting year for us, as we've seen acceleration in and around supply chain technologies and equally that's been pulled on by the evolution of retail and e-commerce.
Thanks, Santosh. Will, you want to bring us home?
Sure, yeah, happy to. And I'm joining you all from sunny San Carlos in Silicon Valley, California. So the Bay Area here, where it is a very clear, sunny, but crisp 50 degrees, somewhere thereabouts. It might get up to 60 or 70 as the sun comes out. Use some rain though. Could use more of that to get that snowpack established. Not just for fun, but for the water we need. I'm joining here. I'm a VP for retail at Plug and Play, also principal in one of our funds. Plug and Play is a family office and runs some corporate programs. We are both a very early stage seed investor with a great track record early on. We were in Honey and in Customer with a K that just got a great announcement earlier this week. Very excited for that. But a lot of investments across sectors. I've been focused mainly on commerce as well and retail. I also run the corporate program. So we have innovation platforms designed for corporations to work around common themes and get startups of all stages involved. So I've been running for the past 3.5 years the brand and retail program for that globally. My background is I was an entrepreneur for about a year in an e-commerce company. I was at Yahoo doing product and partnerships to help the mobile group grow right as the first iPhone was just coming out, among many other sort of Silicon Valley, start small, get very big, very fast. So it's been an exciting journey, really excited to be here and talk a little bit about the current state of things.
Great. Well, just to go ahead and get us started, then I think the elephant in the room and what everyone on our audience really came to see and hear about is kind of how COVID-19 pandemic is impacting investments generally, and then specifically kind of what you're seeing with retail investments. So Scott, I guess we'll go ahead and start with you again, if you don't mind.
No, happy to share some thoughts. I mean, I think for everyone on the call, the pandemic has had a huge influence over their businesses. Ours, I think I probably speak a bit for Santosh and Will, is no different, but we're among the fortunate few that can do our work pretty effectively remotely. And that's been a very fortunate transition over the last 9 months. I think if you told any of us back in March that we would still be operating this way 9 months later, we probably wouldn't have believed it. If you had told me in March that we would have had as productive a 9 months remotely putting money to work, both in new companies and existing companies, I would have said no chance. But I think we've all pivoted and made the best of this two-dimensional interface and found lots of creative ways to get to know entrepreneurs remotely. And it's not perfect, but it's not impossible to spend a lot of time and get to know people and try to understand what makes them tick and what makes their products tick. And I think thanks to probably many of the people on this call and their colleagues, the folks across the retail and brand ecosystem that we benefit greatly from in terms of diligence and trying to understand which of these early stage companies really have the bones to be successful, have been super generous with their time. And it's been almost more convenient and easy for folks to hop on a quick call or a Zoom and share thoughts and ideas over this period than it was in the world of, trying to make time to get together in person. So it's been a mixed bag in general, obviously for all of us, but from a venture productivity standpoint, it's actually been a surprisingly robust period of time.
I think that's a good point too. And I can remember talking to Santosh actually probably in March or April when this was all just kicking off. And I think you said with supply chain specifically that investments were still kind of moving. Do you want to talk our audience through kind of what the background of that is and how those investments were kind of playing out?
Sure. Yeah, I think much like other investors, we were batting down the hatches March, April, and as we were coming closer and closer to summertime, we were seeing this interesting acceleration across our portfolio around commercial activity, and that's only continued here. I think this morning, Flex announced that they'd raised more funds. I know ShipBob has also raised. Both have a great exposure around e-com retail, and equally across our portfolio, we've also seen an acceleration in investment activity that was actually beget and led by a lot of sales acceleration. And really what we're seeing here is kind of this continued evolution into a world of greater e-commerce penetration. People this year were forced to purchase online for both essential items like grocery staples, as well as more discretionary items such as apparel, electronics. And I think kind of the statistic going around, I'm not sure who coined it, but it is very true that you've seen about 10 years of acceleration in a matter of 3 quarters. And we believe here at Dynamo that's permanent. There's been a lot of consumer surveys that lead us to believe that consumers are going to permanently shift some of their buying behavior to e-com channels versus brick and mortar channels. And what that's doing is that's forcing kind of a rewrite of supply chain. So if you think about historically, there's been this static movement of goods to a single location. Over the last 10 years or so, there's been a multiplicity, right? A single brick and mortar has turned into our doorstep for a lot of folks. And that's now causing in earnest kind of how do we think about warehousing fulfillment? How do you think about service transportation, international logistics, and even manufacturing at the far upstream? So it's been great to have that type of supply chain exposure and concentration. And I believe in the next few years, it's only going to continue in earnest as professionals kind of seek to re-architect how their back end operates.
So I think I'll hop in on that. So, I think for the most part, I totally agree, Santosh, with what you're talking about in terms of acceleration, right, in e-commerce. And certainly the beginning of the pandemic and the crisis, it was this spotlight on digital and e-commerce. And you were either an essential goods category and you could stay open, or you were not, and you had to look at your balance sheet. But there was a massive focus and priority and urgency around e-commerce. I think that carries us into next year. I just would also add, I see stores reopening, right? I see a focus from the industry on that reopening strategy, right? So when people come back, what does that look like? And for us on the investment side, if I step back a second, I really think a lot of the industry trends are saying that the deals are going down in the number of deals overall, but not by as much as you'd expect. And some of the valuations have been depressed a little bit. That's sort of across all segments. I've noticed from the deals that we've seen, there's been a lot more bridge and a lot more pro forma stuff. So a lot of follow-on activity. And to Scott's earlier point, I love being able to be remote. And so if you already know the teams, and if you already know, if you know you're fueling growth, then it makes it a lot easier. For plug and play, for one of our funds, we've had about 2/3 of the deals be pro forma. So these are follow-on deals to existing teams and businesses we've known. And in times of crisis, these great entrepreneurs have been able to take that opportunity and really build incredible businesses out of it. So reopening strategy. So when we think about reopening, we love, it's kind of pre-COVID, it was all these segments and personas of consumers. So you reopen, I think you're reopening to the individual. So how can you really reach an individual, provide a very customized clientele type of an experience for them across all different channels? How can you automate? A lot of focus around automation. I'm sure there's some in the supply chain as well, but certainly in the physical stores. Whether it's kitchens, contactless kitchens, a lot of activity there, and sort of dirty, dangerous jobs that you can automate. I think those are really interesting as well. So we're trying to look at what are those technologies, what are the teams that are going to be driving that reopening that hopefully will happen at some point early on 2021.
Great. I know we've been hearing from a lot of our retailers, and we've been seeing it kind of in news articles all the time, is that they really are adopting things a lot quicker right now. And I'm wondering from you guys, kind of, what do you think some of the learnings for retailers are, and how do they kind of keep up with this pace moving forward into 2021? And I know I think I've heard it from you, Will, a little bit, that it takes kind of knowing the team really well and who you're going to be working with. But how do you guys kind of think retailers can even kind of keep that going into 2021 and beyond, and make sure that becomes more of the norm for retail?
Well, look, there's certainly a lesson that's been learned over the last 9 months across the retail landscape. the brick and mortar retail landscape in particular, which is that you can operate quickly. You can make quick changes and big changes and be successful with them. And I think that is a lesson that has the potential to be durable, and has the potential to have real impact on the level of innovation across the retail landscape. My favorite example, which one of many, is a company that Bain Capital is an investor in called Michael's Stores, the crafts retailer, that spent a long time debating and evaluating and testing ideas around curbside pickup, and really made very little progress over 18 months. And then in 4 days on the back of the pandemic was able to launch this across the chain. And it wasn't perfect. And ultimately there was lots of testing and learning and iteration and improvement, but it was more of a ready, fire, aim approach that got the job done for customers. And as a result, kept the business moving. I think that is instructive for how those of us that have been associated with the retail industry for many, many years would love to see innovation adopted. And I think one of the things that the retailers sometimes lose track of is that in this interesting power relationship between a big enterprise and a small technology vendor, the goal shouldn't necessarily be to squeeze the vendor from a price standpoint. The goal should be to squeeze the vendor from a resource standpoint and make sure that you get exactly what you need, the level of attention, the level of service, the level of customization, you name it. And the best vendors are going to bend over backwards to make sure you're successful, but they're unable to do it for free. And so I hope that that balance of kind of focus on partnership and picking the best possible vendors and then working with them for mutual success and working quickly to launch things continues post-pandemic. I think if it does, that has a lot of positive potential for the industry.
Yeah, kind of jumping in there, the one thing something like COVID forces on an organization is focus, right? And you focus on the most urgent problems and quickly getting to acceptable solutions. And I think that's where, instead of having a vast array of things you want to focus on and sample in terms of innovation or startup collaboration, kind of going into the new year as you're sitting down and you're planning as a team and you're thinking about incentives and goals, it should be what are the key things, key problems we want to focus on? And how do you then align and incentivize behavior where you are testing certain solutions with startup vendors, right? And in turn, you are also resourcing on your side for success. And pick one thing, maybe it's one thing a quarter, maybe it's two things a quarter. And at the end of the day, I think my big point is like, pay something. Because actually when you tie dollars and resources to it as a retailer, you're going to be more likely to drive that to success. And equally, when you have dollars tied to it, you're paying a startup. So it's going to be really hard for them, to Scott's point, to not bend over backwards and to deliver on your requests and your asks. And the interesting thing you'll see is like there's this really interesting partnership where both sides will say, hey, this is working. And it's going to show signs of working far before the end of a pilot or a POC period. And that's where I think both sides will be able to be champions of success, and you can move forward, and that will tend to compound. It'll compound inside the organization because you'll start to expand the solution to other divisions, departments, business units, but also there'll be a reputation both from the startup as well as that retailer where, hey, you're a retailer that startups want to engage with, want to work with. And equally, as a startup, you'll start to get more customers. You have a reference now who's willing to go to bat for you and say, hey, yeah, they do back up what they claim to say they can do. So, you know, I think focus, being willing to pay, being able to resource on both sides is important going into the new year.
I want to pick a little bit more deeply into that willingness to pay, because I feel like part of the challenge we always hear from retailers is how do we prove that ROI, or how do we show that to our leadership team? And I know I've heard from you guys some interesting answers on that as well. And I'm wondering if retailers, can they lean on VCs like you to help them vet these startups and really feel comfortable investing money into them? Or how do they kind of pick and choose where to put that money and what bets to make.
So certainly, I think one of the things is it's collaborative with the investment community for sure, right? You find the right partners you trust. And not only can you ask us, our opinion on companies that are earlier stage if you're less familiar about it, but we'll also ask the questions of these audience, right? So the audience here is the tried and true expert for the industry and what's going to work at scale, right? So it's a two-way conversation. There is a playbook though, right? I mean, I was just on another session with a topic on the rise of direct to consumer beauty category, really interesting space. CEO of Manscaped, which was a fantastic guy. He's in great company. He talked about a playbook for direct to consumer brands almost existing, where you could kind of go and launch a new brand in a certain manner online. And I think it applies to corporate innovation within retail. I think there's a bit of a playbook at this point, right? Whether you dedicate the team and the time, the culture change, the processes in place, those types of things exist. And so things like, are we asking about the ROI? Well, instead of that, maybe it's around what are you hoping to learn? What's the scope? Where are you launching? What are the different things you can handle? How do you grow your bandwidth to work with more companies? How do you vet? Maybe you're doing some vetting on your own as well with multiple solutions in a particular space, right? So how do you adopt that playbook and put it into action? As far as KPIs and having, I guess, this universe work together in validating new technologies, it's probably best to have a mix. And I like to talk, so you probably want a mix of something that's further along in far as stages. They've raised more funding, therefore there's a signal that they should be, as they raise more stages of funding, they're de-risking the business, right? So it's a later stage, should be a quicker win as far as risks involved. But you should also have that very early, right? Not necessarily two people in a garage, unless you have a very unique problem to solve, but something early where it won't be, the end output is not going to be what you wanted out of it, but you're going to learn something along the way, hopefully change both your businesses, and maybe there's a chance to grow together, right? So have that mix. And then for the startups on the call too, I used to really talk about, there was a model for you to engage, which was start with the big folks and work your way down. Because if you can work with the large industry players of the world in any kind of category, then great, you can kind of go down market from there. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if, Scott, kind of what you were talking about earlier, I don't know if it takes this mindset change for the larger players to work more quickly. I think now it's almost, start with the small, more nimble folks. And I'd hope to change that. I'd hope you would be just pick the right person who's got the right team, the right ability to work with you, and go from there.
Yeah, the other thing I'd add to the mix is I'm not sure big enterprises and retailers who are big enterprises I would put in this mix actually have a real understanding of the level of energy that vendors spend in their sales process, which is completely wasted for them and for you, right? The level of effort to figure out who are all the people in the decision-making process that can say no, and how do I build relationships with them, and how do I make sure that we understand their concerns. Some of that is helpful in ultimately getting to a solution that matters, but a lot of it is just sales effort. And it turns out the legacy big players that are vendors to all of you, throw Oracle and Salesforce and Adobe and folks like that in the mix, are very good at that because they have the resources to build those relationships and manage them. What little vendors, generally venture-backed or smaller companies, are good at is product, is solutions that can really make a difference, that are disruptive and innovative. They're less good at taking everyone out to lunch and dinner that needs to be taken out to lunch and dinner. And so I would just encourage you to focus hard on the product and the product experts and make decisions based on that expertise. Because what you really want for a successful pilot project is the A team. You want a crack team from the vendor that with your crack team can move mountains and do unnatural acts and make changes on the fly. And that is the kind of thing you can get from an early stage company that you just very, very hard to find in a big company. I would just keep that in mind.
Awesome. I know one thing we hit on a little bit too was kind of that curbside acceleration and how companies have really adopted that. But I know BOPIS, buy online, pick up in store, contactless payments, all of these things are coming into stores, and we've seen it happen a lot more in the last 9 months. Do you see the investments in this area continuing to grow post-pandemic, or has it grown, or were they there 2 years ago and now we're just starting to adopt them? Any taker?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think they existed previously in select industries, and I would even say geographies. I think what has happened in 2020 across the board is it's forced people, regardless of where you live, regardless of what you want, to develop new habits. And that habit basically is I'm going to use some type of a digital interface to order, and then I'm going to figure out based on my routine, do I need it delivered? Am I willing to go there to pick it up? Is it some combination depending on what I'm looking for? And I think they say something like it takes roughly 3 weeks to develop a habit. And my basic attitude is that a lot of these habits have started to really gain hold, and it's going to be really hard to reverse them. So I think in terms of buy online, pick up in store, or curbside pickup is here to stay. It's, I think, going to be important to offer that option. Consumers increasingly want options, right? There's this attitude, I want what I want, when I want, and now how I want it. Is that at curbside? Is it delivered to my garage, in my trunk when I'm sitting in a parking lot? Whatever it is, I think it's important to offer that. And that type of option is going to create loyalty. And that loyalty will over time increase lifetime values, right, of your customer profiles, of your cohorts. So it's going to be an enduring, I think, option as an investor. And I think really kind of where it ends up rubber meeting the road is what type of team, what is their advantage? So are they focused on certain areas of retail, certain geographies, certain themes, and how are they proving that they're worthwhile as a vendor? So that's your kind of pulling it back full circle, being able to speak with some of the folks here in the audience on why is this team going to win versus that team? Because at the surface, it might feel like it's a commodity offering, but it might come down to integration, customer service, growing the solution set.
You know, thought on that topic, I agree with those points. And I guess I think of the analogy of each of us as consumers having discovered Uber and Lyft. And, you know, like, or Clear, if you're a Clear member, when those, you know, when we used to travel, like once you do it, you can't go back, right? Like it's really hard to wave down a cab and pay in cash and collect a receipt in New York City when you know you can use Uber or Lyft. And like, we all remember that magical moment when we did it for the first time, and then we're like, oh my God, like this makes so much sense. I think as you think about how retail's evolved, the price of admission online, sort of the battlefield has been speed and convenience. You know, which site, because it's all convenience shopping, which site can I get through the fastest and get delivery the fastest, et cetera. And I think that the pandemic has accelerated that view, and it's going to kind of translate more and more to the brick and mortar world, where the expectation from all of us as consumers, even in a pleasurable shopping experience, is speed and convenience. And so the technologies that enable me to walk in and have the experience I want and walk out without any overhead associated with talking to people I don't want to talk to or wasting time in line, those technologies are going to matter. And I think the stores that implement them in the most interesting, flexible ways are going to have an unfair advantage for a period of time, just like those that did it online had an unfair advantage for a period of time. And they're going to set sort of the new table stakes of competition.
So it sounds like it makes sense for retailers to be making these investments because they are going to kind of stick with us into the future.
I can provide a quick counterpoint to that. I mean, I see a lot of head nods, and I think there's some table stakes around BOPUS, right? It's been a topic for a while. And you've got great companies, you've got the Happy Returns, you've got Dottle, a lot of others that provide enabling technology, some bespoke stuff. But we always get asked like, well, what's different? And I don't think it applies evenly to all segments, right? So there could be some bargain hunting, there could be some fashion where it just doesn't even apply, right? Or some specialty type stuff where you might be more focused on clienteling, or you might be focused on education. There's a whole transition, I think, of some brands and retailers into more media type, community type experiences. And if you're looking to create that, then it's much more about how do you connect to the individuals? How do you provide workshops, education, demand gen? How are you creating these really engaging live experiences, where they're digital or in the store, which is a bit of a different focus when you think about reopening. And it's not just always about convenience, right? It's really about your brand promise, and rethinking how that exists in this world. And then, of course, you got to think about, well, okay, if we're going to, as part of that, offer the ability for consumers as table stakes to buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, et cetera, then deliver to home, are these things that we're going to leverage these third-party platforms? Do we go with the big ones? Do we build our own? Because there is a lot of potential channel conflict, right? If you go on and you use someone else's fulfillment, then are you giving them additional insight and intel that is part of your secret sauce, right? So what is that trade-off? Do you need to be where your customers are demanding or not? Could you do something on your own? Is it a new offering for you as far as developing a business model for your own infrastructure and footprint? So I don't think it's cut and dry. I think there's certainly a consumer expectation around convenience, but I think, your results may vary.
Yeah, I probably take the other side of that. Not that certain shopping missions are way more entertainment and experience oriented than others, for sure. Some things are utilitarian, I just want to buy it and leave. It's toothpaste. And others are truly about the feel of the environment and the experience and the joy of doing it in person, which will for sure bounce back. And there will be plenty of investment, and I think the world will continue to bifurcate across those two lines, in fact. But even in the high-end, high-touch experiential retail environments, why the hell shouldn't it be frictionless and convenient? Like, people just expect it. So I want to go in and have a great time, and I want to enjoy myself, and I want to touch the stuff, and I want to try it on, whatever. But then why shouldn't I just be able to walk out with whatever I have in hand? Why shouldn't there be the same level of convenience that I have in a more transactional environment? I think we'll all expect it, and I think retailers are going to have to deliver it. And by the way, I have no investments in that part of the ecosystem. I just think as a consumer, it's inevitable.
No, I think I agree with you on the friction part. Like, friction is bad. If you got friction, you're going to fail. I think we just got to ask ourselves at the end of the day, what if someone walks away and they don't have a bag that's full of something, but they have an experience, and that's what they paid for, and that's their expectation with the brand. And for me, this is a great reset opportunity where maybe some of those products also are resold or used, or there's something around that's a lifetime that isn't always tied to, I want this one thing right now. Maybe there's something that's worth the wait, or something else that you take from that type of experience. But yeah, totally interesting. We'll see.
I do think it's interesting that you raised that point, because I think pre-COVID, we were seeing a lot of news about the retail experience and how that was shifting. A lot of the experiential stores, I mean, you saw the Nike store, things like that, where consumers really were looking for that experience. And then COVID hits and it's all curbside pickup. So I do think it'll be interesting in the next year, maybe, to see how that will kind of meld together, and where retail will really sit when it all comes and settles down. But in thinking about also the flip side, where startups are concerned, how are you seeing startups shifting their models to help retailers with COVID related? We saw a ton of technologies kind of earlier this year that were specifically related to COVID response. And I'm wondering if you guys were kind of seeing the same thing, where startups shifting kind of their model and what they were working on to work with COVID, or did they kind of keep course?
I mean, I can speak personally to our portfolio. I think, kind of going back to the statement around team, really good management teams are going to shift. They're going to identify trends, and they're going to shift appropriately in order to capture the benefits of a trend. And in our portfolio, we saw one company that went ahead and had the pragmatic conversation and said, we have 3 brands and retailers in the pipeline, and they're ready to move tomorrow, but we're going to have to allocate resources as such where some of the features in our long-term product roadmap might slip a couple months to up to a quarter. And we ended up having a conversation, and we made the call that that's the right thing to do. And that was, I think, a Q2 board meeting where that was raised. And it's ended up being phenomenal, I think, for the customer. And the big customer is a beauty products brand, as well as the startup, because they saw this inflection point in revenue, but equally their product matured and really has built up a lot of credibility, where they've been able to engage other similar types of parties and prove that they provide both innovation as well as the service and results to back it up. So I think absolutely, startups have responded. These types of people want to solve problems. And equally, when they're taking money from a VC, provided it's accretive to the long-term goal, right? Or that it is an indication of a long-term trend in the market, we're supportive of them and encourage them to do as such.
I saw two really interesting, fun examples, not fun circumstances, but fun examples early in the pandemic in our portfolio. One was Rent the Runway, which had suddenly idle, essentially, not just a giant fulfillment center, but 100 highly trained seamstresses. And they very, very quickly pivoted the work of those seamstresses to sewing masks and gowns for healthcare workers in the New York area. Now, it was easier to do that than it was to actually get the healthcare systems to take the stuff, given the level of overhead and complexity in that ecosystem. But ultimately, they found a way, which was terrific. Similarly, we're investors in a company called Miracle that creates infrastructure for third-party marketplaces. I imagine some of the folks on the call probably are users of Miracle's technology. Miracle on their own, very quickly, when France first got hit, and they're headquartered in Paris, set up a marketplace for all of the vendors around the world that were supplying healthcare-related goods, from hand sanitizer to masks to full-on PPE, as a clearinghouse for that stuff for all of the local healthcare providers and systems to be able to access it. So that at least in France, they avoided this territorial one state or municipality grabbing a bunch of stuff before some other state or municipality could get it. It created sort of an even playing field and allowed all of those goods to get distributed more effectively. So I kind of echo what Santosh said. You've got a bunch of really innovative entrepreneurial people by definition running these companies who I think, were far more interested in helping the universe and helping the ecosystem they play in than anything else over the last 9 months.
Yeah, I love that. Love the question. Totally agree. There is also a lot of great startups around that hygiene space for the reopening thing that I think will last, right? So if you are able to walk in and get a people count, take remote temperatures of employees, a lot of even the distributed workforce that we have today, does everyone need to go back in person? Can you leverage a nomadic distributed workforce? Absolutely. Like, we have the tools now, and there's some great startups in this space that are providing excellent solutions. And then again, all the automation, right? So you've got the Chowbotics and the Dex AI in the front and the back of kitchens or restaurants or other stores, where you can really automate some of those difficult tasks, or the tasks where you don't want the human to human contact. So it's a lot of great tools there. I think it's all things that have been in R&D for a while, and now it's production ready. Now it's prime time.
I like that you mentioned teleworking, actually, and kind of the workplace, because I'd like to touch on that as well, and what you guys see happening in terms of remote workforce. I know early in the pandemic, we were shocked at how well people transitioned, especially in the retail environment, which is traditionally a non-telework environment, how well that they transitioned into that space. And looking forward, do you think teleworking is going to become the norm for many people? I know kind of some people in our office alone plan to work telework from now on, but I'd be interested to see like what technologies you guys think are going to help with that, or if you think moving back to the office will be as soon as we get there.
So I personally think the shift to we're all going to go remote or distributed is a bit overplayed. I think we're going to actually probably, if we look back in history, this is the year where the American work week or work life changed. And I still think that there's going to be a healthy dose of we're sitting together, we're solving problems in a room together. Like you can't beat sitting around the thing behind your whiteboard. Like that's the single thing I miss the most, dealing with our corporate friends, startup friends, so on. And like if I had to guess, you probably have your weekend and you probably have a flex day where you could work at home, and then you have to be somewhere on site. And it really depends on the roles and the functions. But I don't think we're entirely going to be kind of in this world of permanent Zoom, because I think everybody can agree, like it gets exhausting. Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting.
Although I'm sure none of our attendees have Zoom fatigue right now.
Yeah, God, I hope you're right. That's all I can say. This is great for certain things, and it's less great for a lot of things. And you know, I think we're all seeing in our own work environments that there are plenty of sacred cows that have been blown up in a good way, and there probably will be more tolerance in many environments for people working from home in certain situations, in certain contexts, on certain days of the week. But I think most of us thrive on human interaction and those serendipitous meetings, you know, that don't really happen when you have to schedule them on Zoom. And I certainly look forward to, despite not missing long winter nights in LaGuardia Airport trying to get home, I look forward to being back on the road and spending time with people that I get so much energy and inspiration from.
So I'll do a counterpoint if we want one. Some great startup technologies like Rally Video or Hopin, a bunch of things that are trying to recreate some of that spontaneous connection and battle the Zoom fatigue that we're all feeling. So I think maybe it depends on function, right? So if Silicon Valley, which is a bubble, but if that has any relation to some of the technology functions within both technology startups and larger enterprises, right? In some cases, no reason for folks to go back into the office. There's a lot of very productive, and a lot of that comes from some historical, like open source communities that have been very effective and productive working remotely. So if there's a way to tap into that and open up that workforce, that I think that's fantastic. Commerce for sure, while it's definitely come into our homes and our cars and our just regular stay-at-home life, absolutely, and that's going to continue. But yes, I also am very hopeful that commerce itself goes back to the stores, back to main streets. I'm really, really excited for that to happen. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, we'll see what parts. It might be certain segments and certain people that, you know, just prefer to do a lot of their commerce and outsource that to their digital assistants, or remain a little bit more virtual, and other folks, I guess, that crave that human interaction in the way we do business. Certainly, it's been a level playing field having virtual meetings for some of the access to the larger enterprises for startups. It might have been in the past really hard to get the right people in the room, but now that everyone's in their own room, it's a little bit easier to hop on a remote call and get all the right people in the right place at the right time. So we have seen some improvement in that area.
We shouldn't lose that reflex, the ability to move quickly and to also instantiate that trust building process remotely. And then at some point you get in a room and you're still able to develop the relationship remotely once you walk away. That's important to, I think, innovation and growth as a whole.
You know, and it's a really interesting point you guys are both making. It ties back to something we talked about at the beginning of the conversation about retailers, big enterprises in general, retailers specifically, being able to tap into the product expertise, the real core expertise of a company. You know, the physical sales call and the meeting around it doesn't really need to happen, right? And sales reps in many cases are sort of not the person that you, the retailer, really needs to deal with to get your problem solved. But that's sort of the interface that's been most efficient for the company. And one great benefit of this, you know, this remote situation is that you can ask for and expect to talk to the product experts in the first meeting. And in fact, they'll do a better job and have a better chance of winning your business if that's who they have on the call. Sure, there's a point at which you want to meet those people in person, and that should happen at some point down the road. It probably happens in every sales cycle anyways, with the top people. But I think now you can expect that to happen right out of the gate, and I think that's better for both parties.
Awesome. And I know we're getting close to 2:50 now, so I do want to go ahead and make sure you guys have a chance to each talk about kind of what you think in terms of startup investment and in the retail sector. What does 2021 look like and beyond? Kind of what are you seeing on the horizon, or do you think there's any new trends? I know this year was really all curbside and kind of BOPIS and workforce, but kind of what do you think retailers should be looking out for in the next year or two?
I'll throw one idea out there that I haven't figured out how to invest against, but I just think it's an interesting phenomenon. I think each of us through this pandemic, I think, at least certainly it's true of the folks that I spend time with locally, have gotten refocused on our local community in a way different way than was true pre-pandemic. I mean, I grew up in Chicago, and even though I've lived in Boston for 25 years, I never really felt like a citizen of Boston or Massachusetts culturally until the pandemic. You know, I didn't read the local paper. It just wasn't how my mind was wired. And not only has the work at home stuff just brought us all sort of into the community where we're spending time, I think it's re-engaged many of us with local businesses, local merchants, kind of artisans and small craftsmen and things of that nature. And I think there's a chance that the desire for buy local, source local, act local sort of continues. There was obviously a movement in that direction already. It's been accelerated, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot more motivation and energy around it. So what that means for big players, I'm not sure, but I think it's something to keep an eye on.
For me, I guess piggybacking off of that, totally agree, right? So this is a circular model, right? So this is a reset, then being able to produce and consume closer to your home and wherever you may be. I think that supports a very, very great model of commerce where you're reducing waste. So there's a lot of investment that we're making that supports circular economies broadly and sustainability. So I think that's going to be, particularly with the new administration coming in, right? I think we got to look at what the impact on policy would be to where we would put our investment dollars and where the retail industry might go. And so I would anticipate potentially a more focus on sustainability efforts and climate efforts. And for me, that kind of ties back into these circular models of production and consumption. So that's very interesting. I also think, again, all the automation pieces are great. There's a lot of great use cases you can have around automation, both on the robotics side and the software side. You just have the infrastructure to work. So Plug and Play continues to look for investment in things that just unlock and make the infrastructure of data, more easy to use. And then everything around personalization. So being able to, again, have the consumer as one person and build a relationship with them, whether that's looking more like a media or more like a content producer. We love enabling capabilities in that space.
As a group that tends to invest in things that happen in the background, this has been a really awesome year for us because we've long held the opinion that in retail, while supply chain can be seen as a cost center or a place where you try to get operating leverage, it's really clear that now it is a revenue growth driver, right? You drive experiences through how you deliver a product or even an experience. So kind of heading into the new year, a few things that we've been really focused on and interested in is how do you deal with the whole concept of reverse logistics? And we've actually sliced it and diced it in a few different ways. One is a sustainability way, and others leveraging local infrastructure and assets around brick and mortar. So that might revitalize blocks that have kind of gone silent or come under duress because of COVID. But equally, where does that end up as you think about a lot of the software infrastructure? And we're still dealing with silos, right? These are balkanized states. There's not a lot of interoperability between partners, as well as within kind of the partnerships to deliver an experience through supply chain. So we continue to be focused on that. And trying to focus on, what is going on in the next 7, 10, 15 years. Right? At the end of the day, this year is going to be a blip in human history, but an important blip. So let's stay focused on what's important for the long term.
Great. I also have 2 questions from the audience since we have time. We actually have someone from Ireland on here, so another Zoom from a faraway land. But do you guys invest in companies in Europe, and kind of what are those key milestones a startup should expect before investing happens?
So, hello. We actually have a investment in Ireland, out of Dublin, actually, in a company called Mana. And Mana, through COVID, has actually started delivering rations and essential items to vulnerable populations by drone. And right now, actually, in Oranmore, work with Tesco in delivering meal kits to homes. So absolutely invest in Europe. And for us, we come in really early. So we come in pre-product, depending on the situation. And it really comes down to team and opportunity. So that might not be the answer one wants to hear. And it's a very loaded response back, but feel free to shoot me an email. My contact's on our website. Happy to walk through it in detail if that helps.
For Plug and Play, yes, we have over 30 offices worldwide. We invest out of most of them and have almost 1,000 portfolio companies. Typically, you're looking for team traction and technology, right? So yes, again, what Sancho said about the team in place. Have you done something before, even if you've failed, right? That's still very valuable experience. Something I think the retail industry is still getting used to. And then attraction's great, right? So, and I talked earlier about what that means. It used to be, are you working with large players and can you work your way down segments? Not sure if that stays true or not. And then the technology, right? Is there something unique around that? And the sweet spot for Plug and Play are enterprise solutions. We have such an incredible network of folks in Europe, in the US, and abroad, where we can leverage the programs we have to get feedback loops around the technology that's working and getting really make a difference in the industry. So.
Perfect. And then from your guys' perspectives on pilot testing, if a company is piloting something in a user setting and then looking to transition to be sold in retail stores, do you have any tips for those kinds of consumer startups?
I would just say, I'm not sure I totally understand. I think the context matters, but I'm an investor in a company that is a baby products company sold predominantly historically through retail channels. And it's very experiential oriented stuff. Like you need to see it work to understand why it's different and better. And that's a real challenge when your sales partner is Target or Best Buy or Buy Buy Baby, or pick your, historically Babies R Us, who's not necessarily set up for high touch and lots of physical display. So I think transitioning to retail, you got to be super careful, pick your partners well, and make sure that the partner is well aligned with the kind of demonstration capabilities you really need.
Great.
I think I would add to that quickly. So Procter & Gamble, one of our partners, they have P&G Ventures, which is looking for the next billion-dollar category. They've been one of our founding partners in the brand retail program for a long time. And they're really looking for solutions in this category is one of those domains, and I think it does differ based on culture and geography. In the US, when you look at homes, they can be quite expensive. In fact, more seniors are staying in their own home. And there's really a dearth of any kind of product or consumable for that market. So it's really interesting, right? And that's an area where you could potentially look at as a new opportunity to build a business around. And then if you do, and you can get, to Scott's point, the right partners, that could then open up pathways into traditional wholesale retail areas. I don't know, though, specifically if there's anything that you learn from that environment that just directly translates into retail. Would potentially be a follow-up conversation.
Great. Well, I want to thank you three again for joining us, and thank everyone on the line for joining our first State of Retail Startup Investment webinar. You can learn more about RILA's RTech Investor Network by checking out the Retail Innovation Center portion of our website, where you can also check out the members of our startup network, many of which came from these 3 VCs, so we're excited to have them. And please continue to provide feedback through your community leads or directly to us at the RIC so that the information we highlight continues to address your most pressing needs. This webinar was recorded and will be available to all attendees, as well as on our Insights on Demand website. If you ever have any technology challenges or questions, feel free to reach out directly. We're here to help. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.